Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest narration of the web series The Survivor Becomes the Dungeon. If you're new to the series, there is a playlist listed down below in the description. And as always, I hope that you enjoy Chapter 156, Vidmori Point of View. Entering the dining hall, I find a rather ornate-looking room lined with plush carpets that go down the length of the room on each side of the table. There were impressive-looking banners that stretched from the ceilings to the floor that depicted what I could safely assume was a family's crest, considering how often I'd seen it around the place. The table looked fit to sit at least 20 people, and it nearly did just that as I looked over everyone who was attending this meal. At the head of the table was Trelio, who looked admittedly rather haggard with what I could only assume was a fairly serious hangover, if Vivia's comments last night were anything to go by. However, the same could be said for their kids, Vitra and Larkus, as they also looked fairly pale compared to when I saw them last night. Vivia, for her part, looked fairly all right, and at least compared to the rest of her family. As the maid led me through the dining hall to the seat at Larkus's immediate left, I made sure to visibly check in with the others who were enjoying the meal this morning. The meal itself looked to be scrambled eggs, sausage, sliced fruit, something that was remarkably like hash browns, and some kind of toast made from a loaf of brown, grain-rich bread. All in all, it was a generous and well-made looking spread that probably wasn't that far off from what the people of the village were used to eating if I was gauging everyone's reaction correctly. Staying on the right-hand side of the table from Tredia, and to Vivia's immediate left, was Tulby, the two women conversing about something or another. Further down the line, the twins sat together, with Pulma sitting between them, and at the far end was a mage Aspen, who sat across from Cecil as they seemingly continued their conversation from last night about their experiences in the magic, while Aspen sincerely did his best to offer advice and guidance to the younger mage. On the left-hand side of the table, Basmori sat next to my seat, while eagerly digging into the food before him, though he was admittedly rather clumsy and a little messy as he got used to using utensils that were set before him, while more often than not using hands to pick up and eat the food. Frady was served at the table as well, eating from a rather ornate-looking bowl as she was served eggs with sausage, though the sausage was already chopped up into smaller pieces so that she could more easily eat from the bowl. With that said, she was also served a small plate of sliced fruit, which was also helped herself to with equal vigor. Behind the two of them sat Lugosi as he stayed close to the siblings, while eating from a rather large and still ornate-looking bowl that was filled with sausage, other cuts of meat, and hard-boiled eggs. On a second glance, I noticed that Lugosi's coat looked a lot nicer than I remembered. In fact, he looked like he recently got a bath and a rather thorough brushing. Around his neck was a silver chain with the rough-cut but polished green emerald the size of my thumb hanging off the chain. I'll have to see what all that is in a moment. To Frady's right sat Wren, the fox-kin girl, looking particularly bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, as she eagerly savoured the hearty meal while admiring her surroundings. Further down the line, where Chris and his team, along with the adventurers as they seemingly conversed amongst each other, and the elite teens who sat across from them. Among the thieves and adventurers, it seems the only one that didn't get any action last night was Cecil, though likely it was due to him seeking out academic pursuits instead of physical ones. Between Rance and Lily, I could tell they were both of rather good spirits, though at a glance I could see that Rance was sporting some new hickeys around the neck, along with what looked like a bite mark on his shoulder that peeked out from beneath his tunic. In regards to Chris and Sarah, well, Chris had some similar-looking hickeys around his neck, and seemed in better condition than he was expecting after what happened the night before. Though it was Sarah who seemed the most pleased, if not a little confused, about last night's events, as she wondered why her lower back was so much more sore than usual. Looking over to Zax, well, the poor guy just looked worn and sore all over, his arms and legs still feeling rather shaky from last night, as it seems he got much more than he was bargaining for with that young dwarf he lent the party with. Finally, at the very end of the table sat Lostrel and Riley, the two of them conversing between themselves as they did their very best both not to draw attention or cause any trouble, as they were keenly aware of just how unusual it was for them to be dining at the same room as the rank 2 elites, and didn't have the good fortune to be ignorant like the younger members of our caravan. I did wonder where Wither and Blight ended up staying, considering that I'm not seeing them around here. I highly doubt they managed to get into any sort of trouble, so it's not like I have much to actually worry about. Patting Lugosi's head as I passed, I took a moment to dote on both Basmori and Fraley before taking my seat between Basmori and Larkus. The half-elf man managed to force a smile on his face despite the persistent headache that insisted on plaguing him. "Good morning, Mage Vito. I trust you had an enjoyable night in the library," he asked sincerely enough before sipping at what looked to be a mug of tea. I just offered a smile as I scooted my seat. "Yes, you've got quite the collection. I wasn't even sure where to start at first when I began looking over your inventory," I mentioned kindly. Though before I could say anything else, another maid approached and regarded me with a polite smile. "Great Mage, are you ready for your meal?" she asked with a professional curiosity. I could feel Trelio moving to say something to the maid about me not needing to eat, but he opted to hold back and watch how I handled it for myself. I just flashed the maid a little smile before shaking my head. No, thank you. I had more than my fill last night, and I don't really need to eat all that much to begin with," I explained, though considering that everyone else was eating and I was invited to join them at breakfast, I suppose I should get something. "Though, with that said, I would like some coffee with a little bit of cream," I asked, though I was surprised to sense her confusion as she looked at me with an uncertain air about her. I wasn't just her either. Glancing around, I noticed that most of the people here didn't know what I was talking about, though they had a word for it in their language, so it's not like they didn't have it in this world. Tooley knew what I was talking about, though it was actually Chris who piped up, much to my surprise as well as Wren's. "Coffee is a rare and exotic drink around these parts. It comes from the far north in the Darazan hotlands, at least on this continent. The plants are hard to grow and difficult to maintain when compared to tea and have a strong bitter taste that most people aren't accustomed to," he explained before glancing over at me. "They wouldn't have something like that here, boss, though they might have some in the capital if you're looking," he mentioned with a smile, as Wren continued to give Chris a rather incredulous, surprised look about him being this knowledgeable about things that even she didn't know about. He just offered an amused smirk. "What? I make it a point to know about luxury goods," he mused kindly before going back to his meal. "Ah, that's a shame," I say while stroking my chin before looking over to the maid. "Then I'll take some black tea if you don't mind. I don't have a preference in regards to the blend. I don't exactly know if they have specific names in this world, and I don't want to stand out even more than I already have, trying to comb through the memories I've absorbed, trying to remember any. However, if they don't have a coffee culture in this country, or even in this part of the continent, then what do they call coffee tables?" Regardless, the maid lowered her head respectfully before standing tall again. "Yes, Great Mage, I'll be right back," she said politely, as she then turned on her heel and left the dining hall. "So, you have had a lot of experience drinking this coffee stuff?" Vivia asked curiously, her meaning clear to me as she considered the fact that I'm very much a fancy wooden golem as far as she knew. I just smiled a little more, leaning back into my seat while I waited. "I used to drink it quite often while I grew up. It was so readily available to me back then that I hadn't realized that it was meant to be a rare good," I explained away before shrugging a bit. "It's been a long time since I've had it, though. I suppose I just really missed the smell of it." At that, Trelio and Vivian nodded intently, sufficiently satisfied by that explanation before Trelio decided to pipe up. "Oh, just so you know, Defender Lugosi there managed to capture 2 scouts from that foreign army at some point last night. It seems that they were trying to see what happened to their forces, given that they never returned yesterday," he explained, sounding rather pleased by the development before continuing. "They're currently chained up in our cells, but we'll deal with them in time," Trelio said, as if to reassure me. I glanced over to the particularly well-groomed Spitterwolf and his new silver chain with a green jewel, owning a proud-looking wolfish grin from him, as he looked up from his bowl before digging back into the food. "Oh, really? Well, I would expect nothing less from him. He's the leader of his pack back home, and his job normally is to protect it with the other wolves," I say before leaning back and resting my arms on the table. "Though, is there a reason you're referring to him as his title? Lugosi isn't really one for formalities." Trelio chuckled heartily at that, before nodding in understanding. He said as much. Though you and yours have done so much for this town, especially healers, Wither and Blight, it would be wrong of me not to at least be respectful enough to dress you all by suitable titles. Admittedly, Lugosi wasn't comfortable with being called Mr. or Master Lugosi, and insisted that if you were to refer to him by a title, then Defender would be preferable. He dutifully explained while sounding painfully sincere. A glance over at Vivia and a shake of her head in response was enough for me to know that Trelio isn't one to drop pretenses like she was, so I opted to not argue much and offered a smile. "Well, if you insist, I won't try to convince you to do otherwise," I mused kindly. "So, what can you tell us about this coffee? Is it any good?" Vivia asked curiously, just making conversation while everyone else ate and generally had their own ongoing conversations. I couldn't help but flash a grin as I leaned back in my seat. "Is coffee any good? Well, I suppose it's a matter of preference. I personally preferred tea when I was younger, but over the years I found that nothing could beat a good cup of coffee after a rough night or on an especially early morning." I mused before deciding to talk more about coffee, sharing what I knew about the different ways to prepare and brew it, or the many ways that it could be used in cooking, especially with pastries. As we spoke, the maid eventually brought out my tea and set it out quietly in front of me, before dismissing herself all over again. I took a moment to look over the tea, collecting the mug as if the muted warmth radiated into my wood. Bringing the tea to my nose, I slowly inhaled a rather floral scent before slowly tipping the piping hot liquid into my mouth. I didn't taste much of anything, which I expected, of course, but it was still no less disappointing as I stashed the mouthful of tea away in my storage. Trelio and Vivia watched on with interest, wondering where the tea was going since I had expressly told Vivia that I didn't have a stomach. Breakfast went on without a hitch, as we eventually moved on from coffee, with Tulmi leading the conversation and discussing with Vivia and Trelio about plans moving forward in regards to the reconstruction of the village, as well as possible initiative in training up more guards and a possible militia from the village numbers. While they may not be overtly effective combatants, the training may help instill confidence in the villagers after yesterday's events and work towards restoring a sense of normalcy in the near future. As the plates were being collected, Larkus decided to pipe up with a smile while looking significantly better than he had been at the beginning of the meal. "Hey, would you all be interested in sparring?" he asked while looking over the line of teenagers across from him, a small grin of anticipation forming on his lips as even Puma and Vitra looked intrigued by the suggestion. "We don't often get a chance to spar with our peers our age, so it might be fun," he enthused with a charming amount of hopeful confidence. It was then that Rance and Chris shared a glance between them, being the respective leaders of their groups, before the two looked at me next. I just smiled while taking a sip of my mug of tea before offering a little shrug. "I don't see why not. Just try not to overexert yourself. I still have some business to attend to. But the standing plan for today is to still depart for the next town over, and then the capital." The two leaders amongst the peers shared a nod, as Rance pipes up for the guards. "Sure. We're actually on our way to the capital to test our Sapphire rank. It'll be interesting to see how we hold up to some Tier 2 and Tier 3 elites," he mused with a confident grin, which the elite teens eagerly reciprocated. Chris sighed a bit and nodded. "Well, my team isn't really geared for open combat, but any experience in the learning experience, we'd be glad to take part in the sparring as well," Chris explained with a more subdued smile. "The more the merrier," Puma added simply, as the elites moved to stand, soon followed by the rest of the teens. "I should probably make sure that things don't get too carried away," Tulbi mentioned, with an amused look on her face before pointing at Aspen and gesturing for him to follow. "And you're coming along, in case anyone gets hurt." "Of course, Miss Tulbi," Aspen replied deferentially to the higher-ranked elite, standing as he followed the crowd of teens. Though I did see Ren follow the group as well, accompanied by Curious Basmori and Freddy, who were thus accompanied by Lugosi. With nothing else to do here, Riley and Lostrel also dismissed themselves, leaving me with just Trelio and Vivia, as I regarded them with a more serious expression on my face. "Well then, I suppose it's time to talk business, shouldn't we? I have a feeling you're going to want to know just why someone like me is going to the capital, right?" Trelio shared a look with Vivia, before looking at me and offering a slow nod. "Of course, Major Vito," he said soberly, having caught the shift in my mood rather easily, as he then glanced around at the servants, who were still cleaning when he started to stand. "And let's take this to my office." End of chapter. I would just quickly like to thank the T5 peeps: Dragon Soup, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Sevaren Serberous, Red Panda 121, Leslie 517, Bushmaster 177, Casper Arnholtz, Cam Maxwell, Sans the Skeleton, Light Jock, Dragzoon W.R.E, and Lord Asrigal. Thank you very much.